Direct Healing by Paul Ellsworth. Chapter 8, Financial Healing. Since the preceding chapter on financial healing was published in the Nautilus, I have received many letters asking for advice upon points which I had either failed to mention or upon which I had not perhaps put enough emphasis. The universal cry is for something practical, something which a man can begin to use wherever he is, and which will enable him to go where he wants to go. New thought is founded on the golden rule, on the spirit of universal impersonal love, and is for this reason the most practical thing in the world. Selfishness implies isolation, and no man who is isolated from the great soul of things can be truly prosperous. If he seems to be so, it is because he has succeeded in isolating along with himself a certain quantity of property which in itself is merely lifeless matter. But there is a law which decrees that only as a man can permeate and master, and so use wisely and grandly any material thing, can he really own it or save it and himself from corruption. You will find illustrations of the working of this law everywhere. The artist creating in his youth for the love of his art, to which even his appetites and passions must bow. Prosperity comes, and for a time he employs it to farther his work, his labor of love. He masters matter and uses it for its decreed ends. He is adding to his own joy and to that of the universe. Then, very gradually, he begins to look at physical things as ends in themselves. He begins to pity himself for his life of abnegation, of simple living and high thinking. Other men are enjoying the good things in life. So he begins to look upon his material property as a bulwark between himself and the necessity for labor. He begins to live as he sees the purposeless people around him living, and the spirit that transfused and perfected his art vanishes swiftly, leaving him with a cold technique which he sells for so many pieces of silver. Material has become an end in itself, or as a means to an unworthy end, and swiftly the spirit of corruption claims it and its owner. To the superficial observer, the artist may seem to be living a fuller and more pleasurable life than before, but in his heart he knows that when the joy of creation departed, life was finished. This that comes after is merely the swift descent toward the grave. In the lives of the second and third generations of rich men's sons, you will often, though not always, find illustrations of the working of this law. Inheriting property without the desire or ability to use it for the good of mankind. They have inherited the means of their own undoing. The point is not that they have not earned this property, for some who inherit wealth do master it and make it serve. But it is the Spirit that quickeneth. The Spirit cannot be left by a man who has done things to his son, who desires to have them done for him. No, you will not be able to find nothing in the lives of the rich or the poor to confute the laws of prosperity as embodied in New Thought and in all wise metaphysical teachings. And the keynote of all this teaching is love. Impersonal and unwavering love, for anything else is not love at all. You must learn to express this impersonal love, which is a part of you at this very moment. It is impersonal because it goes forth freely toward every living thing, without respect to family or race relations, color, beliefs, or material conditions. But will not such love make me give all that I have and need to someone else, I am asked? Certainly not. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. When the white light of spiritual wisdom shows you that he can use something which you possess to better advantage for himself and for the rest of the world than you can, you will give it freely. You won't need to scrimp. And these cases of you giving material things to other people will be fewer than you think. you will come to realize that the thing most worthy giving is tolerance and kindliness, and sometimes a word of cheer or advice when you know it will be acceptable. Every man has within himself a magnet for drawing from the universal storehouse all that he desires, and usually it will not be best for you to encourage him to look to someone or something outside of himself by giving it to him. And so, at the very gateway of prosperity, a man must change his conceptions as to the nature of abundance and of the means provided to bring it into his life. He must do this before he is ready to begin to demonstrate prosperity. Prosperity is not merely the possession of property. I have known so-called rich people who needed help toward true riches fully as much as any beggar on the street. I have seen them pinch themselves and others, have heard them talk of poverty and of hard times and of sickness and misfortune until I felt like hurrying home and taking a moral disinfectant. Prosperity is poise, adjustment between the activities of the individual and those of the universal spirit. It does not involve the meek acceptance of poverty or misfortune. Rather, it does away with these forever in the life of each individual who becomes regenerated by it. It is abundant love and wisdom and power and substance. And prosperity must include all this. The spiritually perfect man does not earn his living by the sweat of his brow. Neither does he attain or maintain health through affirmations, denials, diet, or exercise. These are the finger exercises of true living. But he lives serenely and perfectly, drawing to himself irresistibly that which he desires when he desires it. If he lacks those complications which the ignorant call luxuries, it is not because he can't afford them, but because to his quickened and perfected sense they do not appeal. Now, this is not a way of trying to prepare you to accept poverty and lack of truly desirable things. This spiritual magnet will draw into your life what you desire, whether it be a brush and a palette or a touring car. But when it is brought under the guidance of the serene wisdom of spirit, there will be added to it the perception of real value. Things are valuable to an end, and every physical detail which does not contribute toward a definite and worthwhile end, directly or indirectly, is an encumbrance. The wise travel light. The attitude which robs physical things of their power to injure is suggested by the Christ statement, "All mine is thine, and thine is mine." This is a description of that perfect poise and harmony between the individual and the universal, which is in reality the most practical thing in the business world. Every advance of commerce and finance is made by the accidental or intuitive acceptance of a fragment of this law. And the most futile thing in the world is the attempt, so often made, to accept part of this law without its balancing and perfecting clause. Right here, many followers of New Thought fail. They are willing to accept all of the fathers as being theirs, but when they are put to the practical test, they are not willing to let anything upon which they have set their hands pass back to the universal storehouse, and when things are torn from them, they cry out and resist. The first step toward demonstrating is to fix the nature of this prosperity and of its reasonableness so firmly in the mind that the old beliefs in regard to financial things will be done away with. Begin with some such consideration as this: I and my Father are one. Nothing can come to me or go from me except as perfect love and wisdom and power direct. And I know that this spirit of communion, which permeates and surrounds me, desires that I should manifest perfection on the physical as well as on the spiritual plane. I have and shall always have infinite, unmeasurable abundance. I can draw without stint upon physical substance, just as I can and do upon the wisdom and power and love to use all this prosperity righteously, and scientifically. Now, this is to be your covenant with yourself, and having set your seal to it, you are not to consider for an instant anything less. The direct and positive side of the matter is so plain that you will have little difficulty insofar as it is concerned. The difficulties encountered are usually negative ones, obstructions from the old way of living and thinking which have been unconsciously carried into the new. One of these obstructions arises from what might be called the bargain counter instinct. It is the tendency to transact business from a limited and selfish standpoint rather than from the impersonal and scientific. Yes, I mean scientific, for nothing is less so than the selfishness which sacrifices the greater good of the many to the apparent advantage of the few. And nothing is more practical and scientific than love, which seeks to build up the general foundation of prosperity upon which even the success of the individual must ultimately be built. So one of the first things to guard against is the spirit of driving close bargains. No bargains is a good bargain which does not give both parties to it a fair equivalent for their labor or for the money which represents labor. If you believe it is possible to prosper by taking advantage of anyone's need or ignorance, you are not ready to live the life of spiritual mastery. And whatever you do, don't try to combine the old grasping, hard bargaining way of thinking and living with the new thought of the Spirit. Be assured you will not be able to grasp the advantages of both, but will rather be torn asunder by the contradictions of the things which you are striving to grasp and hold. Somewhat allied to this trouble is that which arises from the combativeness which hurries to the law for redress of its grievances. The law of man has been necessary through the centuries, and for those who are living carnally it is still necessary. But the Spirit frees from all this. I do not mean that you will turn Antichrist, but that you will have been so directed and perfected by the wisdom and love of the Spirit that you will not need to worry about any exterior authority. You will have no desire to transgress any law which has been established for the apparent benefit of society. If you see that it is a foolish law, you will still be able to live without opposing it. Christ did not strive to tear down the fabric of unwise laws which he found in existence. He lived his life above and beyond them. But if you are beyond the need of law, if love and white light of wisdom have so regenerated you that you have no desire to harm anyone, you are also beyond the need of recourse to law for self-protection. But someone suggests, suppose that I am robbed or injured, shall I not bring my despoiler to justice? Remember your covenant. Nothing can come to you or go from you except as the wisdom and love of your Father direct. If any material thing passes out of your life, it is because, for the present at least, it has lost its usefulness to you. Perhaps it will not seem so to you at the time, but you are not to bother about appearances. Time and observation will demonstrate the absolute wisdom of the law of spirit. And your injuries? You will find that as your opposition, your tendency to resist evil diminishes, the opposition of events to you will cease. While injuries come, you will know that something in yourself is drawing them. Don't be deceived into looking into the agent through which this lesson came to you. He or she could not have hurt you if you had not opened yourself to the experience. Yours was the positive part, and the injury, which is merely a lesson in right living, was bound to come from someone or something. Now, if you still believe in the efficacy of the law of man as an adjuster of grievances, I am not going to ask you to turn your back upon this law. But when the time comes, as it assuredly will come, when you realize the pitiful inadequacy of human justice, I want you to know how to rise above it. And you can do this by turning all of this department of your life all that is beyond the direct control of your will, over to the Father, and abiding absolutely and serenely by His decisions. This will not mean deprivation or long suffering. You will have 100-fold more than you possessed before, and what is yours under this new law will not rest upon the caprice of chance. Another source of failure lies in the tendency to try to look ahead and decide just where the things are coming from. That is not your part. It is none of your business, and when you try to make it so, you are limiting the expressions of the superconsciousness to the measure of your consciousness and foresight. In the preceding chapter, I have spoken of the way in which you are to choose your work, not by apparent expediency, but by a close study of your real desires. If you were left a legacy of $10,000 a year, what work would you do? Well, that is your work. And when you have chosen it, you are to go forward in it, giving it every ounce of power and ability you have. You are not to dissipate your energy by living any life but your own. If you see people around you doing things which are meaningless to you, simply don't do them. Learn to live that direct and effective life which results from drawing constantly from the infinite and expressing the resultant energy and wisdom in your own work and performed in your own way. Intemperance and gluttony and sensualism of every sort are wrong, not because they violate anybody's code of ethics. Gluttony is perfectly ethical, from the average point of view, in fact, but they consume in meaningless side issues energy which you should give to your life work. And when you have done all this, you are not to worry about the material things. If you have chosen your work by the light of genuine desire and are putting all of yourself into it, you may know that it is God's work too. Don't imagine for an instant that the only labor which may be called by this name is preaching. Whether you are a poet or a worker in bronze or steel, you can truly say, "The Father worketh hitherto, and I work." And if you go forward from this standpoint and live consistently in every department of your life, you are as sure of success as violets are certain to bring forth flowers in the spring sunshine. Your Father is living in you and through you. Your desires are His desires. Do you imagine for a moment that His resources are exhausted? Just hitch your business or your profession to the star of the Spirit and see what real success means. You have only half dreamed of it before. Life is magical when it is lived in this way, and every man, when he comes back to the Father's house, is fitted for success. I have spoken of the usual inadvisability of giving money to people whom seem in need. But as this will be a real stumbling block to many who are sympathetic, perhaps it will be well to go a little more into detail. Isn't it selfish for me to have abundance when my neighbor, who is also my brother in the Spirit, lacks the necessities of life? Well, there are times when it is necessary to give to those who lack both substance and the wisdom of spirit, which will enable them to obtain directly. But unless you do this wisely, you will injure your brother far more than you will help him. In the first place, never decide this matter of giving by the state of your own purse. If it is best for you to give, it is best whether you have $1 or 100,000. You at least are living in and from the Spirit. You know that you are drawing upon inexhaustible resources and that your drafts upon the infinite will always be honored. The question is, then, is it best for you to step in between your brother and the direct source of his supply? Sometimes it will seem so, but even in this case, give him, together with material help, at least a fragment of spiritual substance. Give him a kindly greeting. Give freely and joyously, not with the pinched mouth of one who feels that he is being imposed upon. And there will be times when you can also give something more direct, a word of advice as to the nature of supply. The Spirit will teach you when to speak the truth and when to refrain from speaking. These spiritual truths are strong meat, and there are many who are not ready for them. Many who would try to grasp the freedom without the responsibility which must accompany it, and so would bring themselves into greater misfortune than they knew before. So give as the Spirit leads you to give. But do not starve your own life because of others who have not yet come into the truth. It is your duty to live fully and perfectly, and by doing so, you will perhaps help to render others dissatisfied with life in the far country of sensuality. In the beginning, all of these ideas and ideals seem revolutionary and perhaps impractical. We have so long been taught that prosperity is the result of days and nights of congenial toil performed principally or solely for the monetary reward attached to it, of driving hard bargains, of scheming and investing, of looking out for number one, that when the vision of a better way of living comes, it seems impossible that the world can so long have missed it, if it is really possible. But the world is a school, and there are many classes in it. Even now, some are in the primary grade and are manifesting the same crude and brutal tendencies that led the multitude in Jerusalem to crucify Christ. But there are many who are ready for something better, something more direct and certain. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. The Nazarene spoke these words while he was still living and working in the flesh. He had overcome the world, not by getting out of it, but by coming into full consciousness of his own identity. Real prosperity depends upon spiritual living, and spiritual living is a matter of growth. And so you are to go forward from where you now are toward the perfect life which the Father has surely established for you, not by violent effort, but by growth. Formulate your desires. Form a spiritual pattern of yourself and your surroundings as you desire them to be. Take time often to listen to the voice of your Father in the silence. Open yourself to wisdom. Learn to express practical love and kindliness in all that you do, and see the salvation. It is even now here, if you will but accept it. End of chapter 8 of Direct Healing by Paul Ellsworth.